Sorry. Oh, God. Oh, sorry, I've got my glasses. Right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Planning and Highways meeting today, the 7th of July. Please be aware the Council is live streaming this meeting direct to your YouTube channel. While the physical venue of the meeting is different, we are endeavouring to keep the usual meeting format as best as possible. There are, however, some key changes that I ought to highlight. Councillors looking to speak will be invited to do so by the Chair in the usual manner, and will need to come up to their nearest microphone at the front to speak, unless you have a microphone on your table. Please do not touch the microphone wherever possible. For councillors that have table microphones, the sound technician will be unmuting your microphones when you are invited to speak. If councillors have concerns about hearing or seeing others in the meeting, please let the Chair or the Council Officer know straight away. If anyone using hearing aids, please make sure to connect to the hearing loop for the best audio quality. If anyone is joining the meeting via Zoom, there will be a noticeable time delay, so we must be mindful of this when interacting with them and allow them to hear what is being said and respond. I must also run through key health and safety points for those physically in the meeting room. Face masks must be worn at all times except when you are speaking at the microphone or have a medical exemption. The fire exits are via the main entrance that you entered the venue through, or the disabled access entry point. The assembly point is out on West Down Road to the east of the building, and if you are able to, up towards the unmade section of Wilmington Road. In the venue, please limit your touching or shared services as best possible, although I can confirm that tables, chairs and other such surfaces and facilities have been cleaned ahead of the meeting. Please remain seated unless you are invited up to speak or need to take a comfort break. The toilet facilities are by the main entrance doors. When moving around the room, please maintain your distance from others. I would ask that the participants looking to leave the meeting wait until the end of an agenda item to limit distractions for other participants. Voting will be done by show of hands. Please be sure to make sure your hand is clearly lifted and keep it up until the Chair has called the vote. If the meeting goes into confidential session, a short 2-minute break will be held to allow members of the public to leave and stop the live stream feed. If members of the public present in person or via Zoom, members of the public are now invited to participate in one of 3 ways: remotely via Zoom, physically in the meeting, or by submitting a written statement to be read out. For those looking to speak specifically about planning application on the agenda, you will be invited to speak immediately before the committee considers that application. For those looking to speak on non-planning application business, you will be invited to speak during the public participation agenda item. Those members of the public looking to participate via Zoom will be invited to do so first as the relevant point of the agenda. Zoom users are reminded to keep yourselves muted until you are invited to speak. The technical host will prompt when it is your turn to speak via the chat function, so please keep an eye on your Zoom chat function. Members of the public physically in the meeting room will be invited to speak next. Please raise your hand to show you wish to speak, and the Chair will invite you to come to the microphone in order. Finally, a council officer will read aloud any written statements that have been submitted. Public participation is limited to a maximum of 4 minutes per person and must be relating to the item of business on the agenda. You do not need to state your name when you start speaking if you do not wish to, but we ask that you clearly state which agenda item you are speaking about. To all present, please remember to show respect to others in the meeting and avoid interrupting where possible to enable others to follow the meeting. If any councillor feels concerned about any aspect of the meeting or discussion, please clearly state point of order. The chair will then gesture for you to elaborate. If anyone present is felt to be behaving unacceptably, they can be ejected from the meeting by resolution. Thank you for listening. On behalf of the council, I would like to thank everyone for attending this town council meeting. So we now move on to the agenda, and agenda item 1, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Madam. There's apologies from Councillor Jim Lord, Councillors Honeyman and Councillor Everton. They all three have previous commitments.
Thank you. Item 2, disclosure of interest. To deal with any disclosure by members of any disclosable pecuniary interests and interests other than pecuniary interests as defined under the Seaford Town Council Code of Conduct and Localism Act 2011 in relation to matters on the agenda. No. Item 3, public participation. To deal with any questions or brief representations from members of the public in accordance with relevant legislation and Seaford Town Council policy, in accordance with Town Council policy, members of the public wishing to speak on individual planning applications may do so immediately before each planning application. So any members of the public like to speak on non-planning application? No. Item 4, planning applications. Planning applications received week commencing Monday the 7th of June. LW/21/0311, 28 Sutton Avenue. Replacement of existing flat roof with pitch roof and timber cladding to match existing. Any members of the public like to comment on this application? Open to the committee. Councillor Boorman.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think actually it will look more aesthetically pleasing and will look better for the area, so I'm quite happy to support this application.
Thank you. Does that find a seconder? Councillor Edson. Anybody else like to speak on this application? So can I have a show of hands of supporting this application?
That's supported unanimously, thank you.
LW/21/0313, Bournemouth Marine Parade. Replacement roof, rendered elevations and balcony. Any members of the public like to comment on this application? Open to the committee. Anyone? Councillor Boorman.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think that it's just make an improvement to the house, prolong the life of the house with replacing the rendering and the roof, so quite happy to support this application.
Thank you. Does that find a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Payne. Anybody like to speak on this application further? No. So can I have a show of hands of supporting this application?
That's carried and supported.
Thank you.
Sorry, let's start. I've got a text from a friend who wants to do a Zoom meeting tonight. He said he's got it, but he can't hear or see anything yet. Is the Zoom meeting, is it working? Do we know? Is it definitely working?
Yeah, we've got the Zoom up on the screen, so it is working.
Okay, thanks.
If he's in the Zoom, he should communicate with on the chat function with our administrator. She can help them to do anything that we need to do.
Okay, all right.
Moving on to planning applications received week commencing Monday the 14th of June. LW stroke 21 stroke 0082 Saxon Lane, single storey rear and side extensions together with a loft conversion. Any members of the public like to comment on this application? Open to the committee. To Councillor Boreman.
Thank you, Chair. I found reading the HER report really interesting to look at the history of the whole site over the ages. The rear extension I have no issues with. I think it complement and suit the building well. I'm not happy with the side extension. It butts right up to a flint wall. It's in a conservation area. If there are any issues with the flint wall in the future, they would never be able to repair it and we would lose a historic flint wall in a conservation area. So although I'm happy with the rear extension and the loft conversion, I'd like to reject it for the side extension.
Thank you. So find a seconder. Thank you. And any other comments? Yeah, I fully support what Councillor Boreman said to this. Repairing flint walls in a conservation area is a specialised job, so I think we
Yes,
feel...
there was an objection online from one of the neighbours making that specific point. So, yes, it is in a conservation area. It's a significant drawback if they can't, because of the extension, they wouldn't be able to get access to maintain the wall, which is an important feature in the area.
Thank you. So can I have a show of hands objecting to this application?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's subjected to unanimously on those grounds regarding the site, just the side extension as opposed to the other two elements of the scheme.
Yeah, thank you. LW stroke 21 stroke 0343 82 Horth Park Road, single storey rear extension, conversion of garage, creation of porch and rear decking with alteration to fenestration. Any members of the public like to comment on this application? Open to the committee. Councillor Edson.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, Chair, if this is an overdevelopment and looks like it might turn into HMO, or there are objections to it, and I'm not happy with it. So I would propose we reject it.
You're going to object to it on overdevelopment, Councillor Edson? Okay. Yeah, there's been one letter of objection to this application.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't like it.
Councillor Boreman.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Although I didn't have any issues with the extension as such, I was going to ask, is there anything that we can do to address the fact that the resident that did put the complaint in thinks it is becoming an HMO, and whether that we can specifically say that it is for a family and not for multiple people living there, just to put their mind at rest as well.
Give the ears.
Yeah, I saw the residents' concerns. The rule is now that an ordinary dwelling house like this, which is in I think the C3 class, it can be changed to a small HMO without consent. Small HMO is classed as a building or dwelling lived in by up to 6 people living as a single household. So whether it is a small HMO or not is really a matter for the District Council to take up separately. it's not really for the, it's partly for the planning department, but partly for environmental health and housing too, because if it is an HMO, they need to see which class of HMO it is. It's difficult to sustain an objection to it on the basis that it may or may not be an HMO, because, as I say, it can be a small HMO without the need for consent. And as far as, also, I think the neighbour complained about there would be problems with parking. Obviously, a large family can have maybe 3 or 4 cars, so that's difficult to sustain an objection on that as well. And as far as the alterations are concerned here, they do really only affect the rear of the property, which is, well, there's very little impact on the street scene. The rear of the property overlooks there's quite a wide area. The ground falls away, so there's quite a lot of scope at the rear for additional development. So it doesn't really affect the street scene. I mean, I can understand why there might be concerns about it being an HMO, but it's something that can be checked by the council, but it's really separate from the planning application and the elements of the planning application, the extension, the garage, and everything like that. So, as I say, it's difficult to support an objection on those grounds.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I know this road quite well, and there have been a lot of extensions out to the rear of the bungalow. The bungalows still look the same on the street scene, but the rear, I mean, no one looks like a house at the back. So I don't feel there's enough grounds to object on this application, but we have got an objection on the table. Does that find a seconder? No? So, sorry, that falls. So, Councillor Borman, you're proposing to support this application. And does that find a seconder? Thank you. Councillor Meek. And can I have a show of hands of supporting this application?
1, 2, 3, 4. 4 in support.
Those against?
That's 4-2 carried, supporting the application.
Thank you. LW/20/0855, 3 Gardswell Place. Erection of front and rear dormers, including Juliet balcony, loft conversion. Any members of the public like to comment on this application? Open to the committee. Councillor Borman.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, down this road, the majority of properties have front and rear dormers already, so it will actually start looking more in line with the rest of the street, so happy to support.
Thank you. Does that find a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Edson. And any other comments? And can I have a show of hands of support in this application?
That's carried unanimously in support.
Planning applications received in week commencing Monday the 21st of June. LW/21/0303, 21 Cliff Close. Resubmission of the lapsed permission LW/18/0004, erection of 2-storey side extension, alterations to existing glazing and creation of an enclosed balcony. Any members of the public like to comment on this application? Thank you. Would you like to come up to the microphone, please, Christine? Okay, yes, certainly. We can go that one.
Hello, without talking. Hi, my name's Nick. I live at number 22 Cliff Close. I did write an email to Jeff and Christine. Thank you very much for replying today. I really do appreciate that. I'd like to read my email to you. It's not a very long one. It's my letter of objection to the above plan proposal. We'd like to take this opportunity to object to the proposal at 21 Cliff Close. There are several grounds for objections pertaining to consideration. The plans, in my opinion, are not in keeping with the current homes. Cliff Close was built in the mid-1970s. Of this new property would look completely out of place. The size of the proposed extension is approximately the size of the current house again, not so much an extension, but another house built into the current house. In the 3 years of us living there, my wife and my children, 21 Cliff Close, where this to be built, number 21 Cliff Close, it's just been an Airbnb. They don't live there, they just rent it out as Airbnbs. It's a business. I do fear that a new extra large house, which has been double the size it is at the moment, an extra large house with more space will encourage more parties, noise problems that I don't want to have to deal with in the future. With the reference to noise, another major problem for us is the new development is switching the house upside down. Now, what I mean by that is that the bedrooms at the moment at the top, there's 5 houses, it's a block of 5 houses, all the bedrooms at the top, all the living quarters are underneath. They want to put the house upside down, so they want to put all the bedrooms at the bottom and the living quarters at the top. Now, my concerns are things, washing machines, dishwashers going on at night when they're going to bed. I've now got to live next to that because that's where my bed is, next door to their wall. So I do worry about those things. And it's not just obviously the washing machine, it's obviously parties or anything else that's going on. As I've said, just general unwanted living noise. With reference to the balcony, we also have loss of privacy and being overlooked. I'd like to know what drainage system is being thought of, because the prevailing winds and rain we have need careful consideration for the disposal of excess rain where the balconies are. My bedroom, again, will be next to the new balcony, and if it's not dealt with properly, I'm going to have damp walls. So again, it's another consideration that I need to be aware of. Local wildlife. I know we have bats in the area. These bats are seen on most warm summer evenings, probably like tonight. I understand they're protected by UK law. I'm unable to confirm what problems could arise during or after the build. Maybe consultants should be sought before any verdict is given. Looking at the plan for building works, the pathway being closed off for 4 weeks. I don't know if you know about the pathway going up Cliff Close, but there's a pathway going towards the golf course. That pathway, the HM Coast Guard use for emergency vehicles on a regular basis due to it's the fastest route to the top of the cliffs. I understand it's often for life-saving rescue missions. I don't know any other pathway they can use. I also understand the build will be a very heavy truck on this path for 4 weeks. The retaining brick walls, which is very old and fragile and close to the path, holding back the earth, which allows residents to walk along another pathway underneath the bricks. I'm very concerned about the compound effect of that fragile wall with the heavy truck going up and down next to it for 4 weeks.
I have to draw you to a close because you've gone over the 4 minutes. So sorry.
I do apologise.
It goes very quickly.
Indeed.
I think we've got, most
okay.
of, and what we've read also with the letters online.
Okay, just one last thing. Jeff did get back to me, but I have been asked by Martin to say, so give him like 10 seconds. In Martin's opinion and my own, these are new plans. These are not old plans from 2018. So on Martin's behalf and mine, that's what we both see that, but you have to weigh it up. No. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Christine?
Christine Brett, District Councillor and also a member of the Seaford Head Nature Reserve Committee. Thank you, Madam Chair and councillors. I was also written to by these residents overnight, starting off with Mr Craddock, and I have to say he's prepared a very extensive report on his feelings on the whole project, which I would like you to have a look at. I'm going to read you some of that in my reigning time at the end, but I'm also going to read you out what the other lady has said. Mrs Bellingham, I think it is. Right. Yes, Mrs Billingham, sorry. Mrs Billingham is very concerned about a number of the things which has already been raised, and also that the Airbnb will create noise and ruin the enjoyment and residents and users of the Seaford Head cliff path. The applicant proposes to use the pathway which I use to come and go from my house. I'm an older resident and rely on this level access. They also intend to close the public path up Seaford Head during the building works. This is unacceptable as it's used by the Emergency Coast Guard, as we've heard, older people, wheelchair users and parents with buggies. The builders will inevitably park on the green verges and make the 2 disabled parking spaces unusable. I think she means at the bottom of Cliff Close down there. She's also very upset because she voted for the neighbourhood plan and she feels that this is a new development and it goes against it. Right, I'm now going to read you just one or two of the things that Mr. Craddock shared with me. He does think there are considerable design changes from the beginning. He's actually written quite a lot to refer to the CEMP plan, sorry. He says the applicant has included a CMP plan relating to the previous and different planning application which was not implemented. If the applicant was to obtain planning consent and intends to use the same one, it's necessary to draw attention to the serious implications of this for members of the public, users of the South Downs National Park and neighbouring residents. Right. Again, he refers to the emergency route used by the Coast Guard vehicles and cliff rescue. Closing the path will prevent the public from using the only step-free accessible route for wheelchair users and pusher chairs up and down Seaford Heads into the South Downs National Gateway. He's spoken about the excavation and the integral structural integrity of the footpath as well, and the party wall agreement with the South Downs National Park will be necessary and factored into any decision notice conditions. The use of the 6-ton track vehicle on a gravel footpath could damage the surface which is used by wheelchair users. The weight of the machinery could damage the chalk substructure beneath the park and path, and it will worsen the already poor condition of the brick retaining wall which flanks the shared access way for residents of 2125 Cliff Close. He also talks about the disabled parking bays on the esplanade being unsafe during the contractor's work. They're heavily used, as we know, we're very short of those in Seaford. The unloading area shown in the CMP drawing is council-owned green verge, likely to contain sensitive flora and fauna, and provides an important boundary and screen for all residents of Cliff Close. The CEMP has not shown a location of overnight parking of heavy plant vehicles either. Also, the available area for the materials compound, which is a checkered area on the plans, is incorrect. 4/5 of the area is private land owned by other residents. Permission to use their land is not implicit. And then the route identified for general and light materials is the shared pathway for residents of 2225 Cliff Close. Residents of Cliff Close include older persons and children with physical and learning disabilities. The route will need to be protected as it be used for materials taken to site and away from the site. It's a narrow path and will impede residential access for the unspecified duration of the construction period, and we all know how long some construction can take. And what he wants us to do is to consider this in full, in advance of making the officer's report to the Planning Committee over at Lewis. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would you like to lead on?
Yes, before you open the debate, Madam, I need to explain about the background to this application, which is not straightforward. As you know, there was a previous application in 2018, which the description of this application says is lapsed. It's only lapsed in that it can't be renewed automatically because they've gone just beyond the 3 years life of the consent. So the consent ran out in April. If they'd have applied for renewal just before April, just before the expiry, it would have been rubber stamped and there wouldn't have needed to be a full application such as this. But because they missed that deadline, they needed to put a repeat application in. But the fact that the application has lapsed doesn't mean it's scrubbed from the record. It's still the major consideration as far as the planning matters relevant to this application is concerned. And really, it will be difficult to sustain an objection in principle because of the existence of this approval of the same set of plans back in April, as recently as, as April 2018. And when that application was considered by Lewes District Council in 2018, it came to the Town Council, and at that time there were just 2 representations from residents at the time, and neither of the residents actually objected to the development itself, but they raised real concerns about the problems that there would be with access for construction, problems during the construction because of the layout of the close. As you've heard, it's still a major concern. So the Town Council at that time supported the application in principle, but asked the District Council to impose a comprehensive construction environment management plan as a condition, so that all the difficulties of access and construction would be dealt with in a comprehensive plan prior to the commencement of the development. And the timing of the works, the storage of materials on site, the location of any huts or cabins, routing of vehicles, etc., etc. And that was all covered by a condition attached to that 2018 consent. So the concerns that have been raised obviously are still relevant as far as access and possible damage to paths and are concerned. And there are a couple of new concerns, really, that the major ones are the fact that the residents, or some of the objections are referred to the fact that the area which is proposed for storage of materials is not apparently under the control of the applicant. So that could be added as a concern. And the possible damage to public or shared grassed areas and paths because of the difficult layout of the development, that could also be raised as a concern. But the major consideration that Lewes District Council will have to consider is the fact that in principle, consent was granted on this set of plans back in 2018, so it would be difficult to sustain an objection in principle. And if it were to be refused, it's a case where there would be likely to be an appeal, and costs is a classic case for costs being awarded against the council because, as I say, there's really no reason to refuse an application where consent had been granted so recently, and there'd be no change in the planning circumstances, no changes in planning policy or anything like that since that time. So, I say it's open to the committee if they share the concerns of the residents about the difficulties in constructing this or carrying out the scheme, given the constraints of the site. And they can add those concerns and suggest that they are added to the list of issues that should be covered by a construction management plan prior to the commencement of development. But as I said, there's no real grounds for an all-out objection in principle to the development because of this, because of the recent planning history of the site, of the property. Also, the Airbnb matter is open to the owner to use the property for Airbnb. It could be looked on as unneighbourly if it's being used for Airbnb and is causing a nuisance to residents. But that's not really a planning ground. If it's a regular nuisance from parties going on at the property, that's something that environmental health could deal with under nuisance legislation. But whether it's Airbnb or being used by the owner's family, it's still being used as a dwelling house within the normal meaning of the phrase in planning terms.
Thank you. So now I open it up to the committee. Councillor Borman.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask the planning officer, if I may. He said that when this was agreed and the policies and things haven't changed, but in 2018 we didn't have the neighbourhood plan. In 2019 the neighbourhood plan came in, and if we took this as a new application that we'd never seen before, we would look at the neighbourhood plan, and actually it goes against so many of our policies that actually we would object to it. So why is it that we can't object to it now, because the neighbourhood plan actually takes a precedence over planning? Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, what particular policies are you referring to?
GBO3, which says that two-storey side extensions need to be subservient, not wider than half of the frontage of the main building, and it is now basically the same size as the main building, so it's a double building. Same policy that the window proportions, the sizes and the method of opening need to be the same. Well, they're not. And if we then go down to the SF03, which also says that windows need to match the pattern of the surrounding area, which it doesn't. Windows shouldn't be on the side of a building. I know it's down to overlooking neighbours, but this overlooks the South Downs National Park, and then we look at their dark sky policy, it would contravene that. I can carry on.
It's an interesting point, but I think it doesn't really overcome the main planning consideration, which is that the same set of plans were given consent in 2018, and the only reason this is coming to the committee like this is because they missed the deadline by 2 months. So I think, yes, I think you can find contraventions of those policies, and those policies are new policies that only came into being in 2020. But I still think that if we were to object on those grounds, they'd obviously have to be considered, but I still think that they'd be far outweighed by the fact that the records state that consent was granted in 2018, and that's the major material consideration. But if members are concerned that they do contravene the new guidelines, if you like, well, it's the design guide, isn't it, which is part of the neighbourhood plan, then it's open to the Town Council, or open to the committee to point this out to the to Lewes District Council, because while it may not persuade the District Council or the officer to recommend refusal, it may lead the officer to discuss mitigating amending the plan slightly to tie in more with the new design guide. The case officer may go back and suggest a few amendments, but I think it would be open for the applicant in that situation to say, no, I want the plans that were approved in 2018. So, as I say, there might be a possibility of some sort of shifting and some sort of tweaking of the plans if we were to suggest that, but I don't think it would outweigh the weight of the fact that consent was granted in 2018. But as I say, it's still open to the committee if they consider that should be supported, to point that out to Lewes District Council, with the possibility of it going back to the applicant for amendments to be made to tie in more with the design guide.
Councillor Bourne.
Just one other thing. Obviously, they are from the design guidelines, but if we look at policy SCA1, that looks at developments impacting the South Downs National Park and protecting the character of the heritage coast. And SCA6 says that applications should not significantly impact on spatial or visual openness, attractiveness of the seafront, South Downs National Park, heritage coast, shoreline or Seaford Head Gateway. This is on the Seaford Head Gateway as well. So it does go against our policies as well as our design guides. So I would like to propose that we object to this on all of my above.
Thank you, Councillor Bowman. Thank you. Councillor Payne.
I would like to ask, if there's a deadline that you have to have done your plan by and you miss it, what's the point of having a deadline? If you go, oh, well, 2 months later, oh, I'll do it anyway. I want to do it anyway. He had a deadline, he missed it. If he didn't miss it by a day or a weekend, or it didn't get stuck in the post for a couple of days, it was 2 months. So I think we should treat it as a new application and reject it.
The law states that if an applicant applies within the 3-year deadline, it can be dealt with by a very short application, a very small fee, and a rubber stamping exercise. But if he misses that deadline, it has to be a new application. But when that new application is considered, as it is here, the fact that consent was granted in 2018 is, as I say, the weightiest consideration. It's not black and white. It's not either you apply within the deadline or it's scrubbed out, as I think I mentioned. It just means that he has to go to the trouble of putting a full application in with all the plans again, pay a much higher fee and have it consulted on. And if there's a material change in circumstances, a new local plan has come in specifically going against the type of development that he's applying for, then he might be in trouble. But in this case, it's the same set of plans as before. It was granted in 2018, and it's a material consideration in the assessment of this current application, and it can't be just ignored because he missed the deadline. So the deadline is important. It means quite a bit of money, quite a bit of extra trouble for the applicant to take in renewing the permission, but that's
I'll take your point. I think it's pointless then to have a deadline if you can go, well, yes, you have to resubmit it, but if it's no it's not really a deadline, is it?
It's a form of deadline, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Payne. Any other comments on this application? Councillor Meek.
Thank you, Chair. As they say in Parliament, I'd like to thank my learned friend who has done all the research that I don't get into. But you've certainly nailed those points, and I respect that. My standpoint was very much more coming to the South Downs National Park, the Gateway, the Heritage Coast, and I think it encroaches on that. I absolutely applaud your picking up on the dark skies thing. I have sympathy for residents who live alongside, although I can see that there are difficulties there in that some of those things would have to be addressed, as the planning officer said, by environmental health or something like that. The planning officer knows the law far better than I do, but I just feel, like Councillor Payne, that it is a bit rich, if you miss the deadline, and the parameters have changed now. We've got a neighbourhood plan which has changed things. The South Downs National Park policy is becoming stronger and stronger, and not to encroach even up to the edge of where the park is. We want to retain the look as it is now to protect the national park, the heritage coast and the gateway from Seaford. So I would urge us to reject this, if not just as a point of principle, I think, for Seaford Town Council, to make it really strongly known to Lewes District Council that we now, as a committee now, and I wasn't on the committee then, and nor are some other of us, we object to the idea of this. And I know Jeff said, it's a point of principle. I would say, in a practical term, we want to object to it because of the changing nature of the environment and how we see things now, 3 years later. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Meek. Any other comments? Councillor Edson.
Thank you, Chair. Is it not the case that the Seaford Neighbourhood Plan was not in existence when they made their decision.
No, it wasn't.
A draft would have been in existence, but
A draft.
it was adopted in February 2020, and there was a draft national neighbourhood plan from about 2017, 2018 onwards. This was April 2018. I don't think it would have been taken into account by Lewis District Council until it was in a later stage, probably in 2019.
Yeah.
And certainly not
It wouldn't
having
be-
full weight until it was adopted.
It wouldn't have been a working document in 2018.
No, it existed in a certain form, but it wouldn't have been taken into account by Lewis District Council.
So is it not possible then that had it been in its current form, they would have considered
Well,
those points that have been put tonight?
it's arguable, and say if that's what the committee decides, it's arguable, and I'll argue it. In the response that I send to Lewis.
I think it's
I'm
a
your
point to
humble
put to
servant.
them. Would they make the same decision, knowing full well what the restrictions would be? That's all.
It's up
Yeah.
to committee, what we decide on this tonight. You've had the advice from our planning officer.
Yeah,
You have a
thank you.
proposal by Councillor Borman on the table, which has got to be seconded.
Well, I'd like to
Thank you,
second that.
Councillor. And so it is up to the committee what
Yep.
we decide. It's some valid points have been put forward. So yeah, okay. So if there's no other comments, we've got a proposal to object to this application, and on the grounds of various policies from GB 03, SF 01, SF 03, SEA 1 and SEA 6. Right? And seconded by Councillor Payne. Do you think we can stress that if this is rejected by LDC, that we can stress to have the conditions which was laid out in 2018, especially 3 and 4?
Yes, I think if the members are okay with that, then I'll add that to the members. Obviously, there's a possibility that they will approve it. In that case, we still want to try and get them to toughen up the conditions. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll add that then.
Okay, thank you. Is everyone agreeable to that? So can I have a show of hands of objecting to this application?
That's subjected to unanimously on those grounds. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, moving on to LW/21/0217, 46 Beacon Drive, single-storey extension. Any members of... will you be commenting on any of the applications? No, so I can go straight through. Yeah, thank you very much. So open to the committee. Right, Councillor Borman.
Yeah, this is just a simple single-storey rear extension, and can't see it from the roads. It doesn't impact on anyone. Quite happy to support.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Argent, for seconding. And any other comments? No? A show of hands of supporting this application.
Supported unanimously. Thank you.
LW/21/0376, 35 Lexington Drive. Open to the committee. Councillor Edson, you going to go for it?
I see no reason why we can't accept this one. Yeah. Cheers.
Thank you. And does that find a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Payne. And can I have a show of hands of supporting this application?
Thank you. That's supported unanimously.
LW/21/0480, 23 Belvedere Gardens, single storey side extension. Open to the committee. Councillor Edson.
Yeah, I noticed on the plans, but I also noticed on the Google Earth that there was a utilities box outside, but it doesn't show on the plans if it's going to be left where it is or it's going to be recited. I mean, basically it's got to stay on the outside, isn't it? That's the whole reason for it being there. But it doesn't show, so that's all I want to say on that one.
Thank you. Councillor Borman.
Apart from that issue as well was this box, because it was there and suddenly it's not there with the extension, but quite happy to support it otherwise.
Okay, thank you. Let's find a seconder. Councillor Edson. And can I have a show of hands for supporting this application?
I'll mention the box. I'll respond. I'll say I'll assume that the box will be suitably relocated or something like that. Just to show we're on the ball.
Yeah, thank you.
Can you do that one just before get close, please?
Planning applications are received a week commencing the 28th of June, LW/21/0357, 9 Colton Road, retrospective application for retention of a balcony area. Councillor Borman.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it might be retrospective, but they've made sure that it's frosted glass up to the neighbours, and so I'm quite happy to support this application.
Thank you. Does that find a seconder? Councillor Argent. Any other comments? And can I have a show of hands of supporting this application?
That's supported, 5 votes in support.
Those against?
5, that's carried, 5-1 is supported.
Thank you. LW/21/0360, 28 Bishopstone Road. Roof conversion works including building a dormer to the rear, bringing out an existing gable further forward whilst retaining part of the existing roof terrace under the extending roof area. To the side of that, there will be a mirror image gable-ended feature formed with a pitch roof section linking the two. Open to the committee. Councillor Borman.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. When I first started looking at this, I thought this is a huge amount going on and things, but when you actually look at it, it looks straight across fields out the front. Over the back has got quite a big wooded area at the back, so it's not overlooking anyone really at the back. And actually the mirror image gable actually makes the house look nicer, so I'm actually very happy to support this application.
Yeah, it sort of balances up at the front, doesn't it? Does that find a seconder? Councillor Payne was first. Any other comments on this application? No. So can I have a show of hands of supporting this application?
That's supported unanimously, thank you.
LW/21/0363, 5, I'm going to say often, close. Proposed single-storey side extension and oak pergola to the rear. Open to the committee. Okay. Councillor Edson.
Yeah, I can see no problems with this extension and support it fully, thank you.
And you're going to second, Councillor Edson? Thank you. Any other comments? And can I have a show of hands of supporting this application?
That's supported unanimously, thank you.
Tree Works application in the South Downs National Park, SDNP/21/03227/TCA Plumbers, and that should be Silver Lane, not the street, Bishopstone Village. I'm not going to read all the, as you've got it all in front of you. Conservation area. So who would like to lead on this application? Councillor Borman?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The only thing, obviously it says why they want to reduce, why they want to remove certain branches and things, no problem. But T2, they want to remove the elm. Now why? It doesn't say. Is it because it's diseased or it's dead, or why are they removing it? Because there is no reason for it, and I'm not sure actually we should accept the removal of a healthy tree.
No. And it's also picks up on T3 as well.
Yeah, we can make that point. You know, we can make the point that we're assuming that the elm is diseased, but if it's not, it should really be retained, and they can, you know, deal with that comment as they wish.
Yeah, I agree with that, because we've lost an awful lot of elms to the Dutch elm disease, and if it is a healthy tree, I think they should be retained. Any other comments on this application? So you're proposing that we support it, except for the...
Yeah, support it, other than to comment that the elms referred to as T2 and T3 should be retained if they are healthy, and should only be removed if they're diseased.
Yeah. Healthy specimens.
Healthy specimens.
Yes.
Okay.
Does that find a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Payne. And can I have a show of hands?
That's that resolution is carried unanimously. A sort of mixed response.
Moving on to agenda item 5 on page 9. I'd like to thank our planning officer for a detailed report.
I just make a few.
Yes.
Just a few additional comments. I did share the report with Charlie Grimble, who had the main housing input to the neighbourhood plan as part of the neighbourhood steering group, and he supported the report, but he wanted to add that not only has Seaford done its bit for the housing requirement over the last few years as far as Newlands is concerned, that's the major contribution that's mentioned in the report, but there's also additional quite substantial windfall sites at Sutton Lees, Windy Gap, Bybuckle Court, which is being developed at the moment to 6 flats. Avondale Road, the hotel's got permission to change to 18 HMO units, and also existing consents that haven't been implemented for the Constitutional Club and the land on the south side of Sutton Drove. That's another 19 units and 12 units. So there's a lot of redevelopment that's already been approved, a big contribution from Seaford to the District Council's requirements within its limitations, because as I say, Seaford is between the National Park and the sea. It's mostly built up, so it has very little scope to make a substantial contribution to the 700 odd units that are now being required. So that's obviously a point that should be made. The other point is that although I think I said in the report that the national guidance has been amended to take into account the impact on the setting of a national park, which implied that substantial developments on the boundaries of national parks should be in a way treated as if they're within the national park if they have a major impact on the setting of the national park. That relates to one of the sites that's in possible danger of being developed, if you like, at Chington Way, north of South Hill Barn. That additional guidance, or new guidance, isn't actually in the National Planning Policy Guidance yet. It's a proposed amendment along with quite a few other amendments. It's been through consultation and is due to be implemented within the next few months if the normal timetable is followed. So that additional guidance, or toughened guidance on national park developments and developments adjacent to national parks should be in quite soon. That will also should have a big effect on the attempt to put this 3,000 dwelling new settlement at East Chiltington into the local plan, because that lies adjacent to National Park, I think only separated by the railway line between Cooksbridge and Plumpton, that sort of area. So we really want to, I think we really should join the other parishes in the district to oppose the requirement of 700 plus dwellings on the basis that it simply defies common sense not to take into account the ability of the district to provide that amount of suitable land, that it managed to, with the constraints of the national park taking up 56%, it still managed to achieve the 345 dwellings that were required under the previous local plan, which, after representations made during the processing of that local plan, it did specifically persuade the government to take into account the availability of land to balance it against the housing need. And that's how they got to the 345 unit requirement, which was in place up till May, and the district just about managed to achieve that requirement. But to more than double the requirement and not to take into account the availability of land on the suitability of the district to supply that land is something which we should make representations against, along with the other parishes in the district who have the rural parishes obviously have different problems, but it's still the same problem of trying to achieve that requirement of 782 dwellings. Okay.
So, any further comments on this agenda item? Councillor Meek.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to thank Jeff for that very in-depth but well kind of explained resume of the whole situation, because I think it's really helped me to understand anyway the situation. I was going to say something else and I can't think what it was. But anyway, thanks very much, Jeff. Oh yeah, I know what I was going to say. I know that Maria Caulfield in her latest newsletter was reassuring people that, that there wasn't some kind of sinister thing by government to try and impose dwellings on areas, and that, it was brown sites were going to be, investigated first, and that's what would be used. I know she's, against the Polegate site and the East Chiltington site. However, I think by not objecting strongly to the situation that we find ourselves in, I think it still allows legislation possibly to go through which we would be against. So I think a strong negative view on it is appropriate for us in Seaford to try and protect our interests, and as Jeff said, to support the local parishes as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Meek. Any other comments? No? So, you've got two recommendations. Do we want to make a further recommendations of what you've discussed with the committee?
I mean, the recommendations are there. I mean, they're all fine. It's just really also joining with the other parishes in the district. I think that's not mentioned there, but I think that mentions all that needs to be mentioned, and it enables me to. Well, we could do a press release based on that to get residents notified of the situation, and also go to the local MP, with that, and
so you really want a third recommendation, don't you?
Yes.
For
well, yes. Actually, I do say to join with other authorities and relevant. Yeah. So it's already in there. I just missed it at the top line of number 2. join with other authorities.
Oh, yes,
and-
yes, sorry, yeah, okay.
So I think it's all in there, so you can just take it as read.
Okay, thank you. So can I have a proposer and seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Borman, Councillor Edson. And can I have a show of hands, please?
Thank you. It's supported unanimously.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 6. To report on the need for more disabled parking spaces and wheelchair crossings in the town centre and on the seafront, and request members to identify suitable sites for new spaces and crossings to be referred to East Sussex County Council for consideration. So,
So I did a brief survey of the seafront on Thursday, a very nice sunny day, and I found that there are only 2 properly designated disabled spaces on the whole of the seafront, and they're the 2 spaces at Splash Point, which have been mentioned earlier this meeting with regard to Cliff Close. I think they said they were parking vehicles there when builders park vehicles there. So they're the 2 spaces right at the far end of the seafront at Splash Point. They're the only spaces on the seafront with the proper access space around. There's one marked disabled space at the Martello Tower on the curve, but that's only just markings, it's not properly set out. And there's one disabled space at the Buckle car park by the toilets at the other end of the seafront, again with the yellow hatching. But really it does show, as far as the seafront's concerned, there's quite a chronic shortage of proper laid out disabled parking spaces with the space to deal with wheelchairs, etc., etc. And although there's a nice lot of spaces, obviously, and as you go west on the seafront, there are more and more spaces available usually, although at weekends it does get a bit, or sunny weekends it does get a bit more crowded. There's still a need for accessible spaces dotted along the seafront, I would suggest. And there's a couple of parallel spaces at the beginning of the Bonningstedt promenade, which could be used. And there's a couple of spaces at the Dane Road end of the row of parking spaces opposite the Salts, which can easily be used as not echelon disabled spaces, but disabled spaces parallel to the curb. And also there is a need really for, I would suggest, a couple of spaces in between Dane Road and Splash Point, in that, because that area does get more crowded, there are more parked cars in that area because people park there for the town centre. And I park there when I used to go to the office at Church Street, so that's another example. But, so in that whole stretch, there's probably a need for at least 3 pairs of properly laid out disabled spaces to sort of adequately serve residents and visitors. That's what I'd suggest. I didn't cover the town centre, but it's obvious that there is a shortage on the seafront. And but there's no real hurry to inform the county about it, because they're only just got to the end of the review for 2021. So any suggestions that go forward for new spaces, new traffic orders, won't be implemented for a year or so. So that does mean that we have got a bit more time to decide on exactly if we want new spaces, where we want new spaces, both in the town centre and the seafront. So it doesn't have to be a lengthy debate on it tonight, as I say, because the County Council will be taking in suggestions for the next 6 or 9 months before it does its next review.
So if members haven't sort of really gone into looking to where, disabled spaces can go you know, along the seafront. I thought one could go at Claremont Parade of shops, and you know, various places within the town. We can defer this to another meeting.
Yes, I mean, it's the town centre and other shopping parades, as you say. I mean, there's one, I think, on the Alfriston Road shopping parade as a disabled space. I remember that being designated a few reviews ago. But there may be other shopping parades in the town which need a disabled space. Some might not. But as I say, I'm sort of started the ball rolling by giving this information on the seafront. But over the next few months, if members want to give some thought to what's in their local patch and the town centre, then we can put a package together to send to the county council. So, you know, you might want to defer it for two or three meetings, and I bring it back, and we have a longer debate on sort of all the disabled spaces that might be needed, and crossings as well. Yeah. Those are the 2 points that Councillor Meek brought up originally.
Councillor Meek.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and thank you, Jeff, for picking up on that. I think that was from a community services meeting, wasn't it? Yeah, I was going to suggest we're not perhaps the people to advise on this. I had two people who wrote to me about it, and I think really we ought to consult with disabled people themselves because they're the people who have found the problems in the town. They know where they want to get to in the town, particularly with wheelchair crossings and things like that. It would be best, surely, to if we know anybody who's disabled, amongst us or in our wider circle of friends, try and see who you know, see if you can contact them and say, do you want to feed into this? Where is it that you need to cross? Where do you most want to have parking spaces? Is it in the town centre? Is it on the seafront? I know they've already said seafront, but where do they actually want to go on the seafront? Where do they want to access? Do they want to access the sailing club to go for a coffee? It might need to be that direction. I don't know. It seems to me they're the best people to consult.
Yeah, I think there is a group, isn't there? Accessibility, which we could, I think it's Zena Gibbs used to chair. She still does. Maybe we can contact her.
I'll contact the access group, but members might have their own contacts with their own circle of friends and acquaintances.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Foreman.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, speaking to the access group's great, but maybe we can put a press release out asking for people whether to get in touch with their feedbacks as well as accessing the access group. Actually, we could do a press release asking them to get in touch, and then it could be a wider response because not everyone is going to use that access group.
We can preface it by saying that, a recent survey showed there are only two accessible spaces on the seafront. That would sort of alert people to the fact that, it needs to be dealt with because it's a pretty paltry number when you consider that, that other resorts have got spaces quite readily available. So yes, I think it's important. Yeah, we'll do that. I'll do that.
So,
if you want to resolve to do that.
Yeah, if they have a proposal that we defer this to a later date so that we can contact various organisations and have a feedback from the public. Yes, so can I have a proposal, please? Councillor Borman, seconded by Councillor Meek, and can I have a show of hands, please?
That's supported, thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes tonight's meeting at... notifications of decisions from Lewis District Council.
Just very quickly, I'm trying to sort out this blockage on notifying decisions, and hopefully at the next meeting I'll have a nice long update report showing all the decisions made over the last 2 months, and I'll start that tomorrow and I might finish it by the next meeting.
Thank you. That now concludes the meeting at 8:16. Sorry, you've missed 16 minutes of the game.